Hopefully everybody had a good lunch. As long as they don't dim the lights, I guess you might hang in there a little bit. But I seem to get the right after lunch crowd. That slot. Well, anyway, earlier we talked about what the medical physicist does to evaluate the CT scanners and what they have to do to evaluate performance and to adhere to regulatory requirements and accreditation standards. Now I'm going to go in with what the ongoing quality control program is and recommendations of these bodies as well. Again, I'd like to acknowledge Doug and Chad for contributing some to this and helping over the years. Some really good references are on the website for the ACR, the CT accreditation program requirements, phantom testing instructions. Those are there. That gives a list of how to do these tests and also what the criteria are, so you can get those free online. The medical physics standard for performing computer tomography includes what the physicist should do, and also the quality control program that's recommended under that program. And then, of course, there's guidance for the protocols for performing different studies are on there, the practice guidelines for pediatric tomography, as well as all of the different organ systems. There's also guidance for imaging the pregnant or potentially pregnant patient. So there's guidelines there. Diagnostic reference levels, that publication is in there. A lot of stuff was taken from NCRP 172 to help that, as well as the accreditation program. So you can get this stuff on the website. So that a lot of that came from that, since I do a lot of ACR accreditation. Now, one of the reasons why we have to do quality control is that we have either regulatory requirements for us to do that, or the accreditation programs have standards that ask us to do that. Right now, we have the 4 that are approved for CMS, and that seems to be the standard that everybody else is adopting. And all of them require some kind of QC be performed. And IAC and the ACR have specific requirements in what needs to be done, and they have some documentation requirements. RadSite doesn't have any specific QC requirements, but they do require it. The Joint Commission, actually, in their recently published standards, actually it's almost a year now, hard to believe, that the organization just needs to identify what is our quality control program and what are our maintenance activities to maintain quality in our CT imaging facility, as well as the other advanced modalities, but we're just talking about CT. And then the organization also is required to document how often these activities need to be conducted. The AEC, again, you can download their standards from their website, and that gives you an idea of what needs to be done, and here's just a summary of some of that. They have some daily QC requirements, and it needs to be appropriate to the scanner. That's why IEC is a little broader in what kind of equipment that they accredit, and so therefore they want you to adopt a QC program that's appropriate to the type of scanner you have, because there's a lot of things you can't do on some of these cone beam CT units that you can on typical clinical CT scanners. But they do want you to look at the water number, because the CT number for water is really essential in the operation and the use of diagnostic CT. And then some other reference materials as well. You want to look at image noise so that we can see that our noise isn't too high, because as Keith was talking about earlier, really want a good CNR, contrast and noise ratio. And so evaluating that noise and looking at stability in your CT numbers helps you to evaluate that in an ongoing way. And then in the annual survey, then you can look at CNR a little more deeply, or as indications come up. Artifact assessment is part of the daily QC, and then the proper function of any audio and visual and patient safety equipment is also needed, just to make sure that you can see your patient while you're scanning them and be able to communicate with them to keep them from moving, or in case there's some issues so they don't get injured during the scan. And then there are other periodic requirements, again, appropriate to the scanner. You want to include spatial resolution, high and low contrast objects, image uniformity, slice thickness, alignment light accuracy, image display and storage device, all those things that we talked about when we were going through the physics CT survey that we did. And error calibration, if the unit requires that you do that on a daily basis or more often, then you need to do that as well. They also identify that you need to set up action limits in response to the QC. Therefore, they want the qualified medical physicist to evaluate the QC program on an annual basis to make sure that the criteria have been met in this ongoing process. You also they want the QMP to evaluate, is this QC program effective? Is it sensitive enough to detect any problems? You know, you can have really broad control limits, and you're doing it every day, but it's not really picking up any issues. So you want to make sure you can evaluate it, that it's somewhat effective. And you can make your values, your control values, tighter than what they publish in their manual. So evaluate the scanner, see what would work best for that ongoing QC program, so you can get the optimal performance out of that. So you can get optimal images for your radiologists to review. And if there are any hardware changes or major service activities, you need to make sure that QC is evaluated before you move on and start doing patients. And so therefore, if QC seems to be tight after a change and a service upgrade or something like that, then it might be fine to just continue to perform without any further intervention. But it's best that the qualified medical physicist be contacted to see if there is a need for any more comprehensive evaluation, an equipment evaluation, such as after a tube change. There may be a need to make sure that the tube is giving the same output, and therefore your CTDI information is still valid, because there are differences in outputs from different manufacturers that can affect that. So the ACR has their QC manual that outlines all of the QC that needs to be done by the various different team members. It has the radiologist, the RT that's there, and the medical physicist. We went through the medical physicist earlier. Now we'll talk more about the RT and the radiologist, what their responsibilities are. And the ACR, it is an organization of radiologists. They are really they're the lead interpreting member of the team. They're actually reading diagnostic studies that they need to be valid. So they need to make sure that there's a program that's effective, that's guaranteeing that their images are clinically relevant, and that they're minimizing artifacts and other things that can interfere with clinical interpretation. So the supervising radiologist is responsible overall to see that there's an optimization of dose and image quality. And they do that by putting together a team, because they're really quite busy in interpreting the images. There's quite a lot of information that's coming their way, and so they really need the other team members to contribute to this. So to bring the technologists and the qualified medical physicists together and make sure that the protocol settings are valid. They need to validate those, that the doses within the established reference levels that we have for the facility, and that the image quality is acceptable. And then we also are responsible for working together on this team to establish these thresholds. So if our dose is too high, then we can re-examine the protocol based on a discussion between all of the stakeholders involved in this team. The radiologist also is charged with overseeing that patient safety is accounted for in the whole process, that they're reducing the risk from the dose, from getting this study. And so they want to make sure that they're constantly involved in this. And so therefore they need to establish some type of review process. Some people call it the CT Dose Monitoring Committee, or just General Dose Monitoring Committee if it includes other modalities. And so they need to make sure that the protocols aren't being changed, or reviewing them to make sure that if there is a need to change them, that there is a valid process in order to change that, and that somebody's not just changing them without any indication and without authority. And so therefore, this team needs to get together with the supervising technologist as well as the medical physicist to see that this is done efficiently. Also, they should establish a policy to make sure that these dose estimates interface, that means conveying the information to the PACs and making it available for future reference, that's not disabled, so that the dose is retrievable in some form. So it is recommended that they do that for all of the different exams that are available. Now, part of this, in order to be effective, you have to have a participating team that's going in there that's well trained and has the time to conduct an effective QC program. So they need to provide the technologists with the adequate training. So you got to make sure that not only are they just an RT, but they have adequate training in CT specific modalities, and that they're familiar with all of the dose parameters and what they mean, and what are the different effects of the protocol parameters that are there, how that will affect dose and how it will affect image quality. So that's now become more of a requirement to get these the technologists to make sure that they're current with that type of education, so that it's focusing on patient safety. So there's more patient safety specific to CT that's starting to be a part of this whole team effort. So the radiologist really is supposed to be overseeing that this is completed, because he is the essential leader of the team. And then, of course, you need to have the technologist put together the procedures manual along with the physicist, and then make sure that's maintained and that it's being followed. And that, excuse me. And make sure there's time for them to perform these tests, to record it, to make sure that they have time to evaluate it. Because I've been into some places and they have their QC is recorded, and I'll look at it and I see that they failed. I said, did you notice that you were out of spec? They said, yeah, but it was okay, and we just kept moving on. And it's like, no, you really need to address this. It's like, take a look at it. Is it clinically relevant? Talk to the radiologist that's going to be reviewing this. You need to make sure that if there is a QC parameter that's outside of the control limits, that there is corrective action that's applicable to the parameter you're looking at. And it really needs to be discussion with the radiologist. Excuse me. Now, the radiologists and the technologists have a really vital role. They need to review day to day any image quality programs or problems that they see. The radiologist should say, I see some rings in my clinical images, or I see this artifact. They need to relay that to the technologist and let them know so they can look at their QC and follow up on that. So there is a responsibility on the radiologist to communicate with the technologists as well as the medical physicists. And then when you evaluate these artifacts or these problems that they're seeing, do we need to continue acquiring clinical images, or do we need to have corrective action before we proceed? So that discussion needs to happen. And then, of course, initial assessment when you're setting up your protocols. You need to make sure that you have sufficient image quality and that the QC program is set up and that it is being maintained. The radiologist should be aware, hey, I shouldn't come in after a year and see that there were outliers on the QC. The radiologist should periodically look at it as well to make sure he's aware of any things that might be out as well. Of course, the medical physicist and the RT also have to have an important relationship, an ongoing way. The RT is there day to day in the field, using the scanner every day. They know what's going on, how it operates, its little nuances that are associated with it, what they have to do. And so they can document that kind of stuff as part of the QC program. So the physicist has to work with the RT to establish the quality control program, and that may be just going through and training them on how to implement the ACR's program or the IAC's program or whatever program that they agree to come up with that pertains to the standards or that's applicable to the clinical site. And so not only do they establish it, but then they have to make sure that they're working together to make sure that it's properly executed. And so we have, our sites will send us copies of their QC on a quarterly basis, just to make sure that we can see things more than once a year, that they're not outside of the control limits. Also, like I said, when we go in and train them, we will actually set up the protocol that's sufficient to obtain a successful QC program. And what on each scanner, because if they have different manufacturers who are CTs that are out there, you may have to have different protocols. As you know, when Keith was talking earlier, he was talking about how one scanner, you can get the same CNR with different masses, and you get the same dose, because there's different geometries, there's different filters involved, there's different spectrum that come out of the scanners. So just because the protocol looks the same, that doesn't mean that you're going to get images that are going to be the same. So as the medical physicist, we need to work with the CT to establish the protocol that would be acceptable for the QC program. And then, of course, we're a resource that if there are any problems, if QC does go out, they can call us and let us know, and we can give them guidance on what do they need to do. They need to get service in here and make a correction, give them guidance, like, you know, maybe it's just run some more air cals or do a full calibration. Maybe that will take care of things, and we'll take a look at that. So any issues that come up, we should be available. So in the ACR manual, there's a technologist section, and it outlines all the tests that are required for their QC program. It's a cookbook style. It really laid out really easily to follow that. And there are forms that are available there as well. And this is a summary of what those tests are. It's really pretty simple. We really want to make it easy, because an effective QC program, you want to do tests that are going to be effective, that they're not going to be overly burdensome so that they don't do them. So you want to make it simple and effective. So these were what the committee came up with that was really deemed to be effective and simple. It's taking the water CT number every day and looking at the standard deviation. So you're getting a rough estimate of CNR by doing that. It takes about 5 minutes. Artifact evaluation is really big, because that's when you can see whether or not your detectors are going out, that kind of thing. And if you see it and you don't do anything about it, then now that can affect the clinical images that you're going to get the rest of the day. You want to catch those before it affects the clinical imaging environment. So that's done daily as well. One of the things that we do recommend with that is to alternate between axial and helical in evaluating the artifacts, because there are certain artifacts that are specific to helical. And if you do all your QC in axial, then you won't catch those. So it's good to alternate those. And then on a monthly basis, there's the visual checklist that you go through. It's an ACR thing, so we have a visual checklist. I just haven't seen a wet laser printer in many years. So if you have one, and it's used for primary interpretation, then there needs to be a QC program that's done for that. But there are some dry laser printers out there, and that needs to be done monthly if it's used for primary interpretation. So that means if they print images on that and a doctor gives a diagnosis, that's primary interpretation. If it's just like, hey, yeah, that looks like it's positioned right, that kind of thing, and then they read it later on a review workstation, then that would not be primary. And then, of course, the display monitor quality control. That's where the CT tech is sitting, where they're operating, and then they see the images that they acquire pop up, and so that there is some QC required monthly for that. So what Phantom can you use for that? Most of the time, the manufacturers provide all of their scanners with a water-filled cylindrical Phantom that has different test objects in it. They're all different, so some of them you can do all of the tests you want for them, but some of them you might just be able to do water. That's all it is a water Phantom. But the ACR Phantom can be used for that as well, or any of the other Phantoms. This just shows all of the other different Phantoms. We have the ACR, the CAT fan, the APM Phantom, Siemens, Philips, and GE. Those are the main ones that are on there. And so you can see that they're all a little bit different, but you can use them. They're convenient. They already have them, so let's use them. And some of the alternative protocols that might be available is to use the manufacturer's method to do it. And it's okay to do that instead of just adopting the ACR's method. But if you do it, the physicist needs to be involved and needs to sign off on it, needs to approve that it is, and needs to verify that it's acceptable to do that. So if there are automated QC that's performed on the Phantom, the medical physicist should evaluate that that's a valid QC program. So they need to run the automated and then do a manual and make sure that everything is acceptable with using both methods. And then you need to document that in writing that it is acceptable. The thing is that if you have automated QC, they don't have an artifact check on their little automated printout that they have. So you'll have to document that you're evaluating it for artifacts. So there needs to be some other form of documenting that if you're using those automated things. And this is an example, the Siemens Phantom, and you just you zero it there in the middle, and then it moves and acquires all of the data automatically, goes to -80 to the water Phantom, and then it runs the processing of all the data, and then you get a printout, a table of all of the results of that. So what are the recommended QC? The water CT number and standard deviation, artifact evaluation, the visual checklist. You may need to add some additional QC for certain scanners, because if it's got additional applications in the clinic, you might want to evaluate some of these other properties, and so that would be something that is worked out with the imaging team of the radiologist and the QMP and the technologist. Now, who's going to run the QC, the ongoing program? It's really best if you have the same person doing it, so you're minimizing some of the variation that may come, but that's not always possible to do that, but at least to try to identify for that scanner. But that way they're knowledgeable, they're familiar with how things work, they can identify the outliers a lot quickly than somebody who's new. They're just trying to figure out, how do I do this? And so then they get it and document it. And that's usually what happens when I see something that's out. It's like, well, Joe was doing it that day, and he usually doesn't do it, and we just didn't look at it. But you'd have better consistency and sensitivity to any issues that would come up. But no matter what, it should be done as it's required. You need to do daily QC, particularly the artifact evaluation, just to make sure that we're not scanning people with subsequent artifacts. And then anybody who's doing it needs to be properly trained. They need to allow the time for the person to train it. Now, when we go there and they're new to QC, or if there's new people, we actually run the QC when we're there for the annual. We do it ourselves because we kind of just like to check to make sure it's really happening, that kind of thing. And then we go through it with them, and we train QC people that haven't been used to doing it. So we go through that, and we actually can award some credit hours for that as well. That kind of helps to keep them around, because the big thing is when the physicist shows up, they all want to go, oh, I can go, right? It's like, no, I need you here, so I make sure I'm testing this, how you use it, that kind of thing. So part of the requirements for quality control is to have a notebook that has all of the quality control policies and procedures that have been established and approved by the medical physicist in conjunction with the rest of the team. And they need to have the data forms that are being used, or the method that you're going to do it. It needs to be included in there. And there needs to be an area for the comments and communication saying, okay, what was the corrective actions that were taken if there were some findings that came out? Or if there's a change in protocols, what was the reason for the change in the protocols? It's recommended the service engineer also document when he does certain, or she does things to the scanner, so that you can see if there's a change in the QC. Oh, you know what? The service engineer was just in here, and that's why everything's different. You know, and maybe he forgot to recalibrate before he left, and that's actually more common than you would think. But fortunately, that's something that the site can do rather easily and quickly. And the data needs to be reviewed at least annually by the QMP. It's also recommended that the physician review this as well, the notebook. All right, so here's some of the tests. Before the technologist is going to be doing the QC that's due, they need to warm up the scanner per the manufacturer's recommendations. A lot of times, you know, you come in first thing morning, the scanner's been sitting down all night, so it needs to be warmed up so that it's conditioned so that you're not getting artifacts that are due to the fact that it's a cold tube and the electronics have just been sitting around. So you want to just make sure that that's done. And then most of them have these air calibration procedures that they require to be done daily before they go. And so they need to be done. And then they go in and position the Phantom. A lot of them, if they don't have routine cases throughout the night, will actually position the Phantom on the night before. And so it's ready for whatever technologist is in there. So that kind of helps speed things up. But if you have the manufacturers there are holders that hold it in place. You just got to make sure that's secure, it's on there, and then you put it in the correct position for it to obtain the correct data for evaluation. The ACR Phantom, you actually put on the table. You can actually put it just on the table and kind of support it with some towels or sponges or things like that, or tape. But it's really good if you get the holder that you can buy separately with it. That helps the position a lot easier if you can do that. And then use the alignment lights to make sure that you're properly positioned. Because as I said, if you're angled and such, it can induce artifacts into the image that you get. So you scan the Phantom and use the protocols that they recommend for the manufacturer. For the ACR, you use adult head or adult body, but whatever you use, you need to use it the same protocol. And then, like I said, we recommend that we do both helical and axial scans, and instead of doing both every day, you can alternate it. And place the region of interest and get the water number. You either have a water-filled Phantom, and so it's definitely water, but I will tell you this, old Phantoms that still have water in them, especially if they had tap water in them, their density changes over time due to the things that grow in it and such. And so the CT number can drift, and it's not a calibration issue. It's due to the biological material that's inside. But that needs to be cleaned periodically. But anyway, you need to do it in the same location, so obtain those images and keep it consistent so that the QC is consistent. You're trying to minimize as many variables as possible so you can identify outliers and therefore possibly identify the cause. And then with multi-slice, you want to try to take something in the middle where it has the least amount of artifact contribution to it. Of course, for the action limits, you use the manufacturer's Phantom. You will use their limits as well. For the ACR, it's plus or minus 5 CT units. And so you want to make sure you're within that. As far as the noise, there are no real limits. So usually as the physicist, we'll look at it, do some averages and things like that, and just try to keep it within and establish our own limits based on the scanner and our experience with that. But that's how we do it. We set it up with the site when we're there for our survey. If there are anything that goes out of limits, then you need to, as I said, either recalibrate it and repeat the QC procedure to see if it comes back in limits, or if it's something that's significant, you need to contact service for corrective action. If you keep trying to fix it and your CT numbers are out 3 days in a row, that means we might have a bigger problem, and so get service in there. So for artifact evaluation, you need to position the phantom and use the scan parameters that were set up, and do an axial scan, and these are just some examples of a technique that might be used, and use the maximum number of slices possible. And the thing is, do you want to check every data channel for 320 of them? That's something some people do. You can't go through it. That's a lot of slices to go through. I've done it on several occasions, and it's really easy to get kind of, I don't think this is necessary kind of mentality if you do that many slices, because you don't really see anything. You usually see it somewhere else rather than that. But you can really scroll through them rather quickly, and things will jump out if you're used to seeing these images. So it's really good to look at it, because then you can pick up these subtle changes that before they affect the clinical images. Then, of course, you do your helical technique, and you really try to get an effective mass of about the same way with your helical. And by effective mass, that's just adjusting the mass by the pitch, and so you're really getting the same CNR type thing. And so you want to look at 2.5 millimeter images and look and then go through there and you see if you have any artifacts. Now you do this visually, so you want to make sure that the image is windowed and leveled so that you can see it properly. You want to look for rings or streaks or lines. If the technologist sees anything, they need to record what they saw on the QC form. Now it is, the eye is sensitive to changes, so like I said, when you rapidly go through that, they do jump out at you. It's really incredible how that happens. When you're used to seeing uniform, and then all of a sudden you'll see an artifact pop. Sometimes you've already passed it, but you'll come back and you'll notice it. Like I said, corrective action is warranted if you think it's clinical. If it's subclinical, keep an eye on it, talk to the radiologist, that kind of thing. Rerun the error calibrations that might fix it. If they're still present, then just have the tech needs to have the discussion with the radiologist to see, is this clinically relevant? Do I need to, stop using it or only use it for certain type of procedures? And if it is deemed that there is corrective action warranted, they need to schedule service and have it corrected. So this is an example of some streaks that you might be able to see in there, and some rings that are common. Streaks come from, I think I talked a little bit about earlier, there can be stuff on the table and come from contrast media and things like that. The rings come from imbalance detectors. It could be calibration. It could be that the detectors are drifting and you need to be replaced, that kind of thing. Here is a failure of detector heater elements that gave this artifact that came out. And so you got some ghosting kind of artifacts in adjacent areas there. So, and here is some more that shows just various artifacts that can show up on this. And you just need to go through that and say, is this, that one on the bottom, you just want to say that doesn't belong there. That could show up on clinical. So you want to recalibrate things and see that could be a detector kind of problem. And then on a monthly basis, or weekly if you want, they want to get a larger phantom so you can evaluate the artifacts in a larger field of view. And so this is an example of some of those streaks and such that you might see. And so you would window and level to appropriately look at them, but then you have a discussion with the radiologist. Is this really significant? So you want to get it into a window and level that would be used in a clinical interpretation range. So here's just a picture of a larger phantom that's on there. Some of these are kind of heavy, so it's kind of a risk to that if they're a small technologist that's going to be picking them up. just make sure that they're capable of doing it. But if you're only doing it periodically, you can get somebody who can handle it, or see the physicist can do it, or the service engineer can look at it when he comes in a little more frequently. Okay. Oh, there we go. Here's just going through a helical image here, and you can see that they're just kind of popped out a little bit, a little ring artifact. See right there? It comes in. And so that's kind of what you look at when you're looking at these images, and then you can evaluate whether or not this is a detector kind of problem or if it's a phantom-induced problem. Okay. And there it goes. When we do helically, you can see that that ring moved from slice to slice. So that's showing that the detector, as it moves, it's being changed as it goes around. So you have an axial one, gives you a ring, and then as you go around, you get the helical. So you can see that that's a detector. So this is the form that the ACR recommends for documenting the daily QC. And you can see it alternates between the axial and the helical. Is it time? Okay. That's okay. I don't understand time, so I need those little reminders. So, but anyway, so there's a way to document everything. You document the date it was done, what was the CT number that you got, did it pass the limit, was it acceptable, was it within limits, and then document on the notes what if you saw artifacts. And if you saw artifacts, what were they, what did you do? Did you relay it to the radiologist? Did you relay it to the qualified medical physicist? And then you document there that who did it, and then the physicist would review this on a periodic basis and sign it on the bottom. Another thing is, as we said, what's due is the laser printer QC is required, and basically dry lasers, you know, the justification for that has always been these are automatically calibrated. If you're automatically calibrated, why do we need to do QC? You know, that kind of thing. So why is it even necessary? Yeah, because it's calibrating, but it has an instrument in there that's calibrating it, and if that goes off of calibration, if it's not working, then you ignore it. You won't see it until you use it. So there was a Kodak 8700 laser printer. It was performed on schedule. QC was not performed, and then they got complaints that there was a problem with the films that were printed. And it turned out that the sensitometry curve was different than when it was set up, and that was due to a drift on the internal sensitometer. So therefore, if you are printing films that are used for primary interpretation, then the monthly QC is recommended. What that entails is doing a visual analysis of the SMPTE pattern and look for those 5% and 95% patches that are in that phantom. And then you can do quantitative analysis. You take your densitometer and you read the patches of 0%, 10%, 40%, 90%, those squares that are on there, and plot those values and make sure they don't deviate from month to month from the plus or minus 15. So this is the SMPTE pattern, and there are the 5% and the 95% patches. You want to say, can everybody see those in there, the gray patches inside the black and the white? So there's a contrast of just 5% from the low end and the high end, and so you want to make sure you see that. And so that's just a qualitative type evaluation. And then here are the other 4 patches that you take your densitometer and take some density readings, and then you can plot it on a graph like this here. Set up, go month to month, and then document any issues that you come across as you're doing that. Also, acquisition display monitors. This is the acquisition. It's not the review workstation that is used for final interpretation. That's been deemed to be outside the realm of this, and that should be handled separately. And so Hopefully there'll be more guidance for that. Right now it is required for mammography. It is not required for other modalities at this time. And so it is recommended, and actually we actually do that for a lot of facilities. We actually help them set it up because there are a lot of automatic QC programs that can take care of these things, and then some technologists can review to make sure there aren't artifacts or pixels missing. And usually a radiologist, if they are looking at their monitors and they see missing pixels or artifacts on there, they're going to complain, I just spent $30,000 on this thing. It's got a missing pixel, you know. And it's like, somebody come in here and fix it, okay, or replace it. Spend another 30. But anyway, so they should look at that. So they need to examine the pattern and make sure that they can see it, that they can distinguish it from the background that it's in there, and then take care of that. And then, of course, as I said, it's the ACR has the visual checklist. And this is really things that normally you would just take for granted, that you're operating the system, you're using all of these mechanisms on your scanner, and you may take it for granted. And you really are making these mental notes that, oh, you know, there's a problem here, I'll fix it later. Well, it doesn't get fixed later. So this is a way to just say at least once a month, somebody's going to document it. And so that way they can say, okay, I see you documented that there was a problem here, so what's your corrective action, that type of thing. So the things that are recommended to be included on there is the table height indicator. Is that functioning? You know, is that going up properly? You know, if you want to use the table height indicator to position to the ISIS center, you know, there is a problem if your table is not positioned right. The dose of the patient is dependent on the location of that patient, whether up and down. So if you're not reproducing that location, then you can affect the dose to the patient. Because if the patient is down too low, then they're now close to the tube when it's down on the bottom. So you want to, they should try to get the patient to be centered when they're doing that. And for reproducibility reasons, or to look at it when you're evaluating the images, make sure that the height indicator is functioning accurately. The table position indicator, if I move it 20 centimeters, is it truly moving 20 centimeters? Or if that's off, then if you're doing a biopsy, then you might be off when you kind of go in there. The angulation indicator, if they do studies where they're angling the gantry, is that angle indication accurate? So they need to kind of keep an eye on that. Is it displaying on the monthly visual check? It's really, is this thing really showing me that it's working? Or do I need the service come in here and fix the display of the digital output? The laser localizing functioning. When I hit the light, does it come on? Are they lined up? I mean, I go into so many, and I have this side, the laser's here, and this side, the laser's here. And I'm like, wait a minute, this isn't right. And they go, well, this side's right. This one's not. We ignore this. I said, what? You know, and I go, well, as long as they know that, I guess that's okay. But it's really, really universal through this manufacturer that they kind of focus on one side. And it's usually on. But those are the kind of things you want to look at. Is my laser lighter working? That kind of thing. Or if I hit it, no light comes on. You want to get it fixed, and so you would document that. And then you want to look at, you know, it's not becoming as much of an issue as it used to be. I used to walk in, and when I'd go into a scanner to go get a phantom, I'd have to step over high voltage cables and things like that. Now they're really putting them under the floor. They're not as in the way as they used to be. But you want to look at that because this is high voltage cables. So if you start seeing wear on that, kind of indicate that, hey, you know, maybe the service engineer needs to look at these cables, try to fix this potential electrical hazard, make sure that's there. And then the table, is it moving smoothly? Or is all that contrast media that I haven't been cleaning up, gumming it up and stalling it as it moves along? And so they need to be aware of that and document that that's not moving. When the x-ray is on, does it indicate the x-ray is on? You know, does that light come on? Or is there a message that comes on that says that the x-ray is on? So that's something, you know, at least once a month they should document. Yeah, it does. Okay. So they can do that. The exposure switch, if you hit the switch, does it energize the tube and you get an exposure out of that, or is there some kind of a problem with it? Is there a problem if I try to abort? Does it not abort? That kind of thing. So document those type of things. The display window, and level. If you're doing all that, is that getting sticky because somebody dropped a Coke and it's all kind of gooey and it's going to jam up, so it needs to be clean? Or is it now just so old that it's no longer functioning? And so things like that need to be documented. Some places have door interlocks that, that they want to prevent an exposure if somebody walks in. Frankly, I think the exposure of that person is worth it for them just walking in blindly anyway, than having to repeat it on a patient. So I really don't recommend interlocks on doors for CT, because you have to repeat. If somebody just put in contrast media and they're acquiring a run, and then all of a sudden the machine shuts down, now you got contrast overload as well. But anyway, but that's one of the things. If you do have interlocks, do they work? Are all the warning labels present? Does the intercom system work? Is everything posted properly? Do we have all the warning signs like, hey, don't walk into this room, this is an x-ray room, that kind of thing? And then service, if they're coming in, this is really probably one of my biggest pet peeves, is that I come and say, can I look at the service records? And I said, Joe's going to send them to me. He was here 3 months ago. I said, can you please have him send them to me? I want to see where things are. They really should be present. I mean, that's really required to be there, especially when there's corrective action. How else can you document that corrective action was actually performed unless you have a report that it was done? So this is an example of the ACR form that's there. And what we came up with is that we actually modified the form somewhat and put that all on one form so that they don't have to have all those forms. So for a lot of our clients, they use this. They can keep it, and once a month they just fill out this form. And so they can do the visual checklist, they can do their artifact QC and CT numbers, their monthly monitor, and even their monthly large artifact check. And it has all of the criteria on there. So we provide that to them. And then this is the CT quality control guidance document that we come up with when we're first setting up the QC program. This is their direction. This is what you need to do. Because I used to go in there, we'd set it up, we go, and then next year we come in and they go, you never went through that with me. Yes, we did. I said, here's the protocol. It's right here. But we actually go in there, and we used to be able to get in more, but now they lock the protocol, so we have to get somebody to let us in to develop protocols. But we establish a protocol that's just for QC to do this. So it's automatic. We really want to make it simple so that it's done. So this gives them all the directions on what they need to do to complete their QC. The big thing is if you have a quality control program, it needs to be active, not passive. That means if there is a problem, they need to be corrected. There needs to be documentation. There needs to be participation from the radiologists so they know what's going on in their program. If there's a problem, they need to analyze it immediately. It needs to be logged. It needs to be documented. And then, like I said, get that team together and decide, talk to the field service engineer. We need this corrected before we can continue or not. So what is, there is qualified medical physicist oversight. We should be involved more. We need to be visible and accessible. We are. I mean, my phone goes off all the time. I'm surprised it hasn't been going off this weekend, but they really call us and we answer. That's one thing that we do. We do answer. Or it's converted to someone who will answer. Because that's one of the things you want to have them have us accessible so that if there are problems, they have a qualified medical physicist that will give them guidance and how they should correct it. The data that we have, the data in the QC should be available to the field service engineer that comes in. So they can say, so what are you talking about? What numbers did you get? What protocol did you use? And then they can evaluate that so that they can approach it to help resolve it. And as I said, the radiologist needs to report anything they see during their reading. So in conclusion, the manuals, the standards are helping to unify QC, because it used to be whatever the manufacturer said, and all the manufacturers were different. It's now focusing on these high yield tests, so it gives you important things instead of doing things repetitively that don't yield any issues. And it's not time consuming. And of course, the physicist should be involved in overseeing this, and this is required for ACR accreditation. So hopefully that was informative, and I think we have another panel later, or should I take questions? Or I think we'll wait for later, and then we can get out of here earlier. But if anybody has any questions, I'm around. Thank you.